Welcome to the Why You're Wrong Fantasy Football Podcast. It is week 13 going into the NFL season. We are on episode 43, so we've got 2 weeks left of the regular season for fantasy football players out there. And a lot of us have either basically packed it up and moved on to next season, while a decent majority are actually still relevant in playoffs. We just need miracles. We need to go on winning streaks, and we need teams to go on losing streaks. So it's a wild 2 weeks left in the fantasy season. Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm 7-5 in every single league. I'm fighting for the playoffs. Haven't clinched in any of them yet, but hopefully if I get one more win, puts me at 8-5, 8-6. I should probably make playoffs for all my teams. So I'm pretty happy.
That's a good feeling. So I am your monotone master, and next to me is Brian, our fantasy force here. You can find us on social media on TikTok and Instagram as Why You're Wrong FFB, and on Twitter as You're Wrong FFB. If you want to watch the show live, check us out on YouTube. If you want to listen to it in your car, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we got to get into some weeks 13, 12 headlines. I forget what point in the season we're at. So some reactions. So as we know, I'm the Seattle Seahawks fan. And watching the game last night it just summarized how I felt about this football season, where I know the team is bad and I'm just watching the game like, what is going on? And it's just, you have that slight glimmer of hope at the end where you made that last final stretch, and all you need is a 2-point conversion to send it into OT, and the team just falls flat.
And then we learned the new rule too about that guy being inside the hash marker for the onside kick. I'd never heard that rule before, but honestly, it was so impressive that they even got the onside kick. They should have just let him have it. I thought that was just like, at first I thought that the flags that they were getting on when they had a 97-yard drive to tie the game, I was like, oh, this game's so rigged to let Russell Wilson come back. Russell is the golden boy of the NFL. They're going to let him come back and win this. And then they called a flag on the onside kick, and I was like, all right, maybe they're not.
It was just kind of like, I'm just like kind of against flags where, regardless if it's for my team or against my team or any team out there in general, if the flag happens to be called on a player where it had 0% of an impact on the play, then like, why are we calling the flag?
Yeah, I mean, he literally wasn't even going to get to the ball too. Like, I think they showed the replay, and he wasn't even there at the time that it was recovered. So I don't know why they called it. It would have been such a better game if they went to overtime and, Washington fought their way back for a win, or Russell Wilson, sucked all game and then came back and won the game. It would have been such a better game for the viewers, but I don't know why they called that. I thought it was kind of dumb. However, the Seahawks did get a lot of good calls in their favor. So I think Washington deserved to win that game regardless.
Oh, they definitely never. If you told me 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 6 years ago that the Washington football team would be trying to run out the clock over the Seattle Seahawks, I'd be like, there's no way possible that could ever happen. And that's what happened last night. Antonio Gibson had 27, 28 carries?
29 carries.
29
and
carries.
Seven catches. Crazy.
And 0 touchdowns, because J.D. McKissick is the only running back allowed to score, apparently.
I mean, I think Gibson probably got like 6 opportunities to score a touchdown within 10 yards and just couldn't punch one in. It's very frustrating to see, because I think he ended the game with 20 points on the dot, or 19.9 points on the dot. And he would have had like over 30 points. And that would have been the start of the Antonio Gibbs season that we never really got to see throughout the year.
And I think it's just because we have one relevant player left on defense, and Bobby Wagner. And I think because Seattle is playing so poorly, all the announcers could talk about was the Hall of Fame career that Bobby Wagner has had, because he's the only person to talk about on our defense at the moment.
Jamal Adams got a pick too. You don't see too many picks from Jamal Adams. I was actually shocked to see that.
That fell in his lap. The only reason he got that was because Bobby Wagner tipped the pass.
Yep. So Bobby Wagner's doing things even when he's not. So, I mean, I don't like Jamal Adams, but I just know his career.
I don't either. Oh. I want my 2 draft picks back from the Jets that we gave to them.
I think it's a little too late now.
Yeah. The Jets are like, good riddance. It's basically the worse the Seahawks do, the better the first round pick is for the Jets this season too, which is just kind of like frustrating, because it's probably going to end up being a top 10 pick easily. And that's something the Seahawks could have really used instead of Jamal Adams.
Yeah, but they chose the other route. And I'd be surprised if Russell Wilson's back in Seattle next year. I'm thinking, I'm kind of hoping he goes to the Packers when Rodgers leaves, but I don't know. He might be a hometown hero. Be like, I want to stay with Seattle the rest of my career. I don't know what's going to happen.
I think last note about Seattle, then we'll move on to the actual fantasy podcast. But I want them to move on from Pete Carroll. I just feel like he's a defensive-minded coach. The defense is terrible. Let's get someone in here with an offensive mindset like Andy Reid style or Kyle Shanahan, something to make the offense less stagnant.
I mean, if they want to be able to compete in that division, they're going to have to do something.
Yeah. But let's move on. So my next point is Leonard Fournette just kind of stole the show in Indy this weekend. 4 touchdowns, having a 40-point week, basically made every single fantasy player for the Bucks irrelevant or disappointing besides Robert Gronkowski.
Yeah, I was shocked to see that Brady didn't even throw a touchdown in this game. Or did he? He threw 1 touchdown in this game in Leonard Fournette because it was to Leonard Fournette and he had
Yeah.
4 touchdowns. So I don't think he's going to do it every week. I mean, there's always those fluke games that Leonard Fournette or someone, back in the day when the Patriots were running the ball pretty heavy with Tom Brady, like Garrett Blount had his days. I remember Jonas Gray. Jonas Gray had a 4 touchdown game. It seems like there's always one game per season with Tom Brady where the running back just absolutely goes off. And that was Leonard Fournette this week.
So, and didn't Ronald Jones also score a touchdown too?
Yeah, Ronald Jones did. I think they scored 5 or 6 touchdowns total. It was just a massacre on the Bucks end. They
Yeah.
needed that win too because they were coming off a couple bad losses.
Remember at the beginning of the season when everyone was like 50-50, is it going to be Leonard Fournette or is it going to be Ronald Jones? And Leonard Fournette was going in like the 7th round, and now he clearly should have gone in the top 3 at this point.
I mean, I could have expected that Leonard Fournette was going to end up taking the role. I didn't know it was going to be throughout the season. I thought it was going to be more of a 50-50 split throughout the season. Then come
Yeah.
playoffs last year, Leonard Fournette was going to take over, but that was just not the case. They just went Fournette the entire season.
And so with the way the Packers played against the Rams, I feel like, is this the Packers' years? Like they're finally going to get over the NFC Championship hump, or is Kyler Murray going to come back healthy with the Cardinals and be the ones to upset them in Lambeau at this point?
See, I don't know. I feel like the Packers and the Cardinals are both the same thing. They're very good in the regular season. Well, I don't know. We haven't really seen the Cardinals in the playoffs yet, but I feel like they're both just going to choke in the playoffs, and Brady's going to end up going back to the Super Bowl. I mean, year after year, the Patriots with Tom Brady, it was the same thing. They lost a few regular season games, like, oh, it's always up in the air. Like this team's going to win. The Packers look good. The Cardinals look good. The Rams look good. Like all these teams. And then Brady comes in the playoffs and it makes the Super Bowl. Like I'm fully expecting the Bucks to just run through the NFC with ease, and maybe have a tough game against the Packers, but I just can't see either of them winning an NFC Championship game between the Packers and Cardinals.
Yeah, because the reality is you got the Packers, the Cardinals, the Rams as a wild card at this point. You've got the Buccaneers, and it's so hard to say, but the Cowboys. So it's like one of those teams, like they're all good on paper, but a few of them are they're gonna choke in playoffs, and you're gonna see Brady in another Super Bowl. That's how it feels.
It is. And then the AFC, it's funny because the AFC is like, I would say the AFC is almost a little bit better, if not. I mean, not really, because the AFC is more up in the air, but there's a lot of tough teams in there that are kind of underrated, I would say, because the Ravens are at the top of the AFC right now. The Pats have the number 1 defense. They're tied for first in the AFC. The Titans, clearly, they're probably out of it at this point. They've lost A.J. Brown. They've lost Julio
They lost
Jones.
everyone.
They lost everyone. They lost Derrick Henry. I think Derrick Henry is actually going to be done for the season. I saw some type of report on it that they were going to bring him back, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen anymore. And then you got the Bills. Can't count out the Chiefs. So AFC is always up in the air. And my thing is, I don't understand how the Ravens are first in AFC, because as much as I love Lamar Jackson, he's on my fantasy team. For whatever reason it is, they win games just in the ugliest ways possible.
Yeah.
He's the first quarterback ever to throw 4 interceptions and win a game. That's just absolutely ridiculous. And they didn't even have that great of a defensive game too. I think
Actually,
it was
Russell Wilson did that in a very important playoff game where he threw 4 picks and they still somehow ended up winning.
It's crazy. They keep squeezing out wins where it's like they make a fourth quarter comeback, or they only win by like 5 or 6 points to like terrible teams too. And somehow they're sitting at the top of the AFC. Meanwhile, the Patriots are outscoring their opponents like 30-0, and like on an average in their last 5 games. Like they're the top in the AFC right now, but obviously the standings don't show it. They have the same record, but I think the Ravens have a better divisional record, which is a tiebreaker for that. So I don't see the Ravens doing much in the playoffs, even though at the top of the AFC. I'm sure the Chiefs will probably make a comeback in the playoffs and probably end up in the Super Bowl again.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I know this is coming from an extremely biased opinion, but I see the Patriots as a very, very good 500 team right now, because I can't really count the win versus the Texans or the Jets or this past Titans win as like legitimate wins, because all of those teams were just in terrible spots. They should have lost to the Texans, but they made the comeback win. So it's like I'm not saying the Patriots are bad. They've been a lot better than we expected this season, but I'm not ready to call them a top 5 team, but they have been pretty good with Mac Jones and the defense basically being the core of their team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Pats fan, so clearly my answer is a little bit more biased, but I also agree that we play Buffalo twice in the next 3 weeks, and I think that if we sweep Buffalo, we should definitely be considered as one of the top 5 teams in the NFL. If we go
Well,
1-1, I
one and
still think
one, I would still put them up there.
I would still put them up there too. And if we go 0-2, then obviously we might not be there yet. But I think our defense is so good right now that it can stop anyone. And obviously, we've seen Josh Allen struggle with the Jacksonville Jaguars. We saw him lose some pretty bad games to some pretty bad defenses. So put him up against a number 1 defense. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I think they play on Monday Night Football this week. So it's going to be a really good game.
So let's move on to some of your points, Brian. So on your list, so let's talk about the Rams because it felt like they were having this Hollywood story at the beginning of the season. They kept signing big name after big name after big name, but they put up just 3 ugly losses.
I don't know what's wrong with the Rams. I personally think that it's the Odell Beckham effect. Even though they lost the game before he joined them, I think that they try to force feed the ball too much to players that they want to force feed the ball to. And I also think that Robert Woods going down also has a huge factor into what's happening with their season because Robert Woods was a great slot receiver. It was a good 1-2 punch to Cup. Now teams are just double covering Cup. You have Henderson who's not running as great. He's kind of like the focal point of the offense. So there's a lot of things that are going wrong. The defense isn't doing well. Von Miller came into the defense. They expect them to be a top tier defense. Ramsey's getting burnt by Devontae Adams. Like there's so many things that are wrong with them. I don't know what's going to happen. I expect them to make the wild card, but I wouldn't expect them to go much further than 1 playoff win or 2 playoff wins.
I think it'll be interesting to see, like, basically who their matchups are and does this team turn it around. I think they're still trying to figure out their offense with the absence of Robert Woods because you can't just force Odell into his role. Once they figure out how to rebalance that offense after losing such an important piece, I bet they win their last few games and they're back into consideration as a top end team going into playoffs.
Yeah, I think Stafford's getting flashbacks from the Lions days. Like, wait a second, I don't know what the playoffs is. I shouldn't be. I think
He was
that's
in
what it is.
Lambeau and he forgot that he was on the Rams and not the
Yeah,
Lions.
he just forgot about it. He's like, oh, I should be on the Lions. Like this, I don't make the playoffs. Let's just tank for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
But to my other point, McKissick, JD McKissick, sad to see that he went down with an injury, but for all those Gibson owners out there, you should be pretty happy to see that the Gibbs season could finally take a turn in
If
week
you're
15.
still in playoff contention at this point,
If
though,
you're still in
because
playoff contention.
there are plenty of teams where if you took Gibson to be one of your main anchors, you have not been thrilled this season.
See, I mean, he did have a good game last night because Washington was winning the majority of the game. He had 29 carries. He had 7 catches. He had like 19.9 points, over 100 yards rushing. I think he had 40, 50 yards receiving too. So he had a great game all around, and it was really good to see. But it was against Seattle, who has one of the worst rush defenses in the NFL. They were at home in that game. Russell Wilson doesn't look very good. So I'm not huge on the comeback for Antonio Gibson, but it is definitely trending upward right now.
I think he's back into he's a low end RB1 confidence level.
Yeah, I would say more high end RB2 because he will probably have games where he struggles. And who knows with J.D. McKissick? He kind of looked fine when he was on the card. I think he's probably concussed. So he'll probably be out this week, maybe next week. But come playoffs, when J.D. McKissick does come back, it's going to be interesting to see if Gibson keeps up this level of play and they just kind of move McKissick to the side or if they just bring him right back into the role and we're getting the 6 and 7 point games from Gibson for the rest of the season.
I would just love to see him succeed. This man has been playing with a fractured leg all season. I just want him to succeed because of how much I love the player as an individual. But I think it's just like this offense is just like very unreliable with Taylor Heineke right now. So there's going to be a lot of good games and a lot of ugly games left in this season. Do you
Yeah.
know what? Do you know what hurts, Brian? The Eagles.
Jalen Hurts. Jalen hurts the Eagles. Jalen Hurts was the number 1 fantasy player going into week 12, and he has one of the easiest schedules against quarterbacks for the rest of the season. He was supposed to be electric, dropping 30 points like he did last year at the end of the season, running like crazy. They got absolutely exposed by the Giants this week, and I'm so shocked to see it. It's even shocking that he didn't have – I don't even think he had a touchdown, and he had like 3 picks, and he still ended up with like 11 points, which is just crazy to think about. So I don't know what's going to happen moving forward. They do still have an easy schedule. I expect Jalen Hurts to bounce back, but that was an ugly loss, and you don't like to see that for the number one player in fantasy football.
No, it's something we all felt like could happen with the way Jalen Hurts plays, but you're not thrilled to see it this late into the season when there's already some controversy at quarterback.
Hey, if the theory keeps up that for the last 5 years, the quarterback that's been taking QB7 or over has ended as the number one fantasy player or number one quarterback in fantasy, Jalen Hurts more likely than not will finish quarterback number one, but we'll wait and see.
Before we move on to the next part of our podcast, I just want to say that that quarterback that's going to be that discussion for next season is 100% going to be Trey Lance. So if the 49ers can stop being cute and just move on from Jimmy Garoppolo, so we could at least have a few game sample size to see what this man can do.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that's a good pick for preseason. Way too early preseason pick
Right.
for Q1 next year. I can see it.
But moving on, so our Devil's Advocate team this week, I just haven't really changed this lineup at all because it's just all players we both hate. So we got Derek Carr, Jamar Chase, Mike Evans, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley. They were missing their tight end this week, so I gave him David Njoku. Melvin Gordon in their flex had 74.8 points in total. So I took an L because my team fell flat. You did win this week, Brian. So I'm now 6-5.
I won last week. I won
Okay.
last week, I believe, and I don't know about you. So I think we're tied right now. 6-6.
We could be. I'd have to go back and check because
I got to go look at the stats.
this team has just been it's been more infuriating because of how many players we didn't like at the beginning of the season that have been doing extremely well, or players we put faith in at the beginning of the season that we basically turned away from and now coming back and having good seasons.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan Taylor was just the worst take of all time, and
Yeah, I don't think
totally
either of us would have
was
won
wrong.
last week with Jonathan Taylor anchoring that team.
Yeah, Jonathan Taylor is just something else right now. I actually did. I think I put up like 130 or 140 in my league. So in the league that we're in, so I might have won, but I don't know. Jonathan Taylor did drop 52, so that is
Yeah.
kind of deep.
So just moving on to impactful news, which has really just been injury news forever this season. So Christian McCaffrey back on IR again. He's out for the season. Dalvin Cook expected to miss a few weeks with a torn labrum and dislocated shoulder. Darren Waller is week to week with a bone bruise. A.J. Brown is placed on IR. So for the Titans, A.J. Brown, Julio Jones, and Derrick Henry are all in IR. And then Deebo Samuel, the shoe finally dropped 13 weeks into the season, expected to miss time with a groin injury.
Yeah, I think he's expected to miss like 2 weeks or so, but Deebo is also one of those guys that was just like not expected to do it. I knew he had the talent. I think it was just always the injury concerns around Deebo Samuel. That was always a question mark behind him. But we knew he was always going to be healthy. We always knew that he was going to be this running back, wide receiver, Cordell Patterson versatility guy. I think he would have been drafted higher in drafts, but the seasons he's having right now is absolutely incredible. It just sucks that it finally got up to him and now he's injured.
Yeah, so just so far for the injury record, like I think I'm gonna make a giant spreadsheet with boxes and stats of which guys got injured and which guys kind of failed us because I love looking back on what went wrong throughout the season. But so far, I think 4 out of the top 5 picks have now either been injured or are lost for the season. That being McCaffrey, Dalvin, Henry, Kamara has been missed a lot of time. Zeke has had games where he's been disappointing and he's gotten hurt, but he still hasn't missed a game yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then Saquon's missed some time, and then other players have missed time, and it's just like not looking great for any of the top end running backs. So I'm not thrilled about who I'd want to be taking first overall next year.
You know who hasn't missed time? Hopefully, knock on wood, is Austin Eckler.
Yeah, that's true.
Our golden child. He hasn't got hurt, and he should have been drafted probably higher than 6. I mean, he has just been an absolute monster. Didn't have as great of a game last week because the Chargers are still kind of struggling out there. But when the Chargers have a good game, Austin Eckler is just an absolute monster.
And even he just seems to be their only relevant player, even when they do have a bad game too.
Yeah, R.I.P. to Mike Williams, the wide receiver one was.
That experiment is it's over at this point. Even if he does get the targets, it's not what it was at the beginning of the season.
You can't guess when he's going to be dropping 4 points. He'll probably have another 30-point game between there, but it's so unpredictable. You might as well just leave him on the bench at this point.
So we got to talk about the highlights of the week. The studs at quarterback, Dak Prescott, 25, Aaron Rodgers, 26, and Josh Allen had a nice 28. At wide receiver, Kendrick Bourne had a 2 touchdown game versus the Titans with a 20.6 day. Adam Thielen, another 20. And Jaylen Waddle had a breakout game. And I just want to talk about these wide receivers for a second because they're all interesting names. So, Brian, is Kendrick Bourne fantasy relevant now?
Honestly, I think I wouldn't say that he's a top tier fantasy player, but he's
He's
definitely
definitely
consistent enough.
flex worthy.
He's definitely flex worthy because he's dropped 20 in 2 of the last 3 weeks. I think he added in like a 7 point week. So he had like 20, he had 7, and then he had 20. And he's had a pretty consistent year throughout, the duration of the season. And Jacoby Myers doesn't catch touchdowns. We know that. He caught his first career touchdown, I think 2 weeks ago against the Browns, maybe. I forget what game it was. No, it was someone else in between there. But anyways, Kendrick Bourne's like the only guy that actually catches touchdowns other than Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry's kind of been slowing down because Jonnu Smith came back. So if you're desperate and you need to start someone, you don't really have a flex guy, I think Kendrick Bourne's pretty good to slot in there.
Yeah, it's almost like Nelson Aguilar and N'Keal Harry are just irrelevant afterthoughts. It's just Kendrick Bourne is the red zone guy, I guess, at this point from as in the wide receiver group because he's the one getting the plays designed for touchdowns.
I mean, did you see that touchdown? He caught a ball over the middle of the field, tiptoed up the sideline like he was making plays. It wasn't an easy touchdown. Like
No, he
he's
got a
good.
great block too.
I knew he was good too. The Niners just never used him correctly when he was there for the one season that he was there. So I've always knew that he actually had the talent to be good. And now it's just paying off that the Patriots actually throwing him the ball.
And then it feels like Jaylen Waddle is having like a super amazing but yet super quiet breakout season because everyone is so obsessed with how Jamar Chase is doing and how disappointing Devontae Smith's season has been that Jaylen Waddle has been that guy right in the middle between the two of them having a great fantasy year and just doesn't get the recognition for it.
Honestly, Waddle is doing what Chase was doing at the beginning of the year. Chase has slowed down a lot in the last 4 weeks, and he had an amazing start. Obviously, the rookie of the year ended up going to the first 7-8 weeks of the season. Now he's kind of fallen off a little bit and hasn't been doing as well. I mean, he's still staying up there like pretty decently, but Jaylen Waddle is absolutely just blowing people out of the water. I think he's back-to-back 20-plus point fantasy weeks, so he's going to be real good towards the end of the season. And I'm going to stop hating on Tua because Tua isn't that bad. I had to start him in a fantasy week and he got me 20 points. So I'm happy with Tua right now, although I don't think he's amazing. I think it's more the defenses that's carrying the Miami Dolphins right now. But I'll give Tua a little bit of respect because he is slinging the ball to Jaylen Waddle right now.
And then at running backs, Cordell Patterson is no longer a wide receiver. He is a pure running back to me. The fact that you can play him in either position in some leagues, I think, is just completely unfair. But Patterson had 26.5. Joe Mixon had 30.3 and Leonard Fournette had 40.6. And it's just, he killed you if you played against them because no other running, like some teams had Joe Mixon and Leonard Fournette on the same roster, and that's just unfair.
Yeah, imagine having Austin Eckler and Jonathan Taylor last week when it was 52 points, 40 points. That's even worse.
Yeah, that is
But
a nightmare.
they did have good weeks.
But I don't think there's a world where you could have easily had Eckler and JT and this was an 8-man league.
Yeah, no, I agree. Unless Jonathan Taylor really fell off to the second round, I could see it. Maybe if you got Eckler at like, I don't know, 8th pick and then
you got
JT on the turn, I could see it. Jonathan Taylor was going round 2 in a lot of drafts. So I see people with in our league, Cam, he has JT and Kamara, which is just terrifying to think of.
We've just been lucky that Cam has not had Kamara the past 3 weeks, or he'd be walking away with the championship right now.
Probably still will, but we'll see.
And then at tight end, Rob Gronkowski, 15.8, Dawson Knox, 16.7, and Jack Doyle, 17.1. It's weeks like this where I kind of get frustrated with the fact of investing an early draft pick on a big tight end because when they don't show up and then these guys you could have gotten in the mid rounds or later rounds or as a free agent have top end weeks, it's just so infuriating to watch.
Yeah, I think Gronk's going to end up being a top 3 tight end for the rest of the season. I mean, he didn't even score last week and still had 15. Just imagine what it's going to be when the Bucs are really fighting for a playoff spot. Well, I mean, they're still up there. They're 8-3 right now. So they're still doing pretty well, but there's a lot of teams that are following up behind them for the first place in the NFC. So this is a time where Gronk absolutely explodes, and I would not be surprised if he ends as the tight end 1 for the last couple of weeks of fantasy football.
And then at kicker, this is one of those weeks where you just kind of hate the fact that kickers are a fantasy thing because Nick Folk had 21 points, Dan Carlson had 21 points, Matt Crosby had 13. Nothing is more infuriating when you're trying to just crawl out a win and you just see your opponent having a 20-point game from his kicker. Brian, his
Yeah,
kicker.
I played Gronk, I played JT, and I played Nick Folk. And Nick Folk's 21 is the reason why I lost. I think I lost by, I don't know. I think I lost by like 12. And Nick Folk had 21. My kicker had like 6. It's like such a big difference right there. Like if you just had a normal game, I probably would have won it. But the Pats just kick field goals left and right. They're good enough. They're good enough to get over the 50-yard line, but they're not always good enough to score. And that's why Nick Folk's the best kicker in fantasy football right now.
And he's also playing with a bad leg too, isn't he? Like he's not 100% healthy. He's just kicking these easy field goals. And then he hits like the long ones too to just he could have had another 50-yard field goal. Nick Folk could have had like a 26-point game and that just wins you the week.
I was gonna say, yeah, he missed a 50-yarder. It would have been 26 points. It's got to be like a top kicking game of all time right there. If he had 26 points, it's just unfortunate that some of us had to play him, and that was me. So I took the
I
loss
as
this week.
well. And then at defense, it was actually a really great week for defenses. There were 10 different defenses that had over 10 fantasy points, but the top three were Denver at 17, Cincinnati at 19, and 23 for Miami. So are the Pittsburgh Steelers a team to now target if they're playing against the defense? Because their offense has been atrocious.
Wait until we get to the picks for defenses because I took Baltimore against Pittsburgh this week because Big Ben is just he's
Oh,
so slow, he's so old, he just doesn't make the right throws. Just give Najee the ball 40 times a game. That's the only way you guys are going to end up scoring. Big Ben just makes terrible plays. He should retire at this point. I don't know what he's doing, but if you have a defense and they're playing Pittsburgh, you're going to get an interception or you're going to get a fumble because Big Ben, all he does is turn the ball over.
and the duds of the week, there were a lot. So at running back, if you had to pick them up and play them, David Johnson, 6.5, Najee Harris, 5.2, Nick Chubb, 4.9. Kush McCaffrey, DeAndre Swift got less than 4 points each. They both did go down with injuries, though. Miles Sanders, if you had faith in him again, 6.9. David Montgomery, who had a super easy matchup versus the Lions, 8.9, couldn't get into the end zone. Then Alex Collins got benched after a fumble, had 1.2, which was just insulting, just injury to insult. And then Saquon Barkley, another top end back, 7.3.
Yeah, I mean, Najee, that's a tough one to bite. I mean, he was game scripted the whole game. They got absolutely smoked by the Bengals. A lot of them were injuries. Miles Sanders, we should have known. I played against Dave Montgomery and I still lost by like two. I think I lost by like 1.5 points because Gibson couldn't score. So I was shocked to see Montgomery didn't drop 30. I was going into that Thanksgiving game. I was like, oh, Dave Montgomery against the Lions. If I can squeak away 18 or less, I'll be happy. And he only put up
Yeah.
8.9. So I was actually shocked by that.
He should have had an easily 20-point game versus that team.
I mean, he usually does. So last year, I think he probably averages like 30.2 points a game versus Detroit. So I was shocked to see he only had 8.9 points.
And then down at wide receiver, Mike Williams, another disappointing week, 5.9. Jamar Chase, 5.4. And then every Broncos receiving option with the way the Broncos were playing offensively. Michael Pittman, 7.3. And then this was really just like the true shocker of the night. DK Metcalf had one catch for 13 yards, having 1.8 fantasy points. And the entire game, the announcers were like, why aren't they throwing the ball to DK Metcalf? It didn't make any sense. Like, this is why you went 5-and-out 3 times in a row, or 3-and-out
Yeah,
5 times in a row.
I think it's just Russell Wilson should have never came back from injury soon. He clearly is not comfortable throwing the ball. He's clearly not comfortable playing quarterback right now. He came back way too early. He wanted to win games. I think DK said that they wanted to win like 5 straight, make it into the playoffs. I mean, the chances of the Seahawks making the playoffs now are almost slim to none.
It's pretty much
So
zero.
it's pretty much over at this point. So I don't know why they brought Russell Wilson back so fast. I think that if they just threw in Geno Smith, DK would be a little bit better, but 1.8 points is kind of just ridiculous for a guy that you drafted as maybe your wide receiver one, or maybe got him in a package on the back end for a wide receiver one, wide receiver two, whatever it may be. But he's been struggling lately with Russell Wilson at quarterback.
And then Terry McLaurin had another quiet night, 7.1 versus a bad Seattle defense. This one just came down to the fact where they didn't have to throw the ball to win the game, so they just ran the clock out, and Terry McLaurin doesn't do well in that situation.
Yeah, Terry will be fine. I think that it was just a fluke game, but then again, I don't think we're going to be expecting big wide receiver one number games from Terry throughout the rest of the season. But he'll probably stay in that 7 to 13 range, right about there.
And then at quarterback, Cam Newton had basically 8 points. Started off the game where it was looking right. He had like a rushing touchdown. I was like, this is going to be a game where Cam gets like 2 rushing touchdowns and is fantasy relevant. And then bombed so hard as a quarterback, 5 for 21 with 2 interceptions, got benched. And I think his quote was saying, if Cam Newton's on your team, doesn't mean you're going to win.
Yeah, I saw that too. But give credit to Miami's defense because they've actually been, I think, the best defense other than the Patriots in fantasy football. For the last 5 weeks, they've had over double-digit points, and I've actually held on to them because they had really easy matchups at the start of that 5-game stretch. And I was like, you know what, maybe I'll just hold on to them and I'll keep playing them. And I kept playing them, and they have been absolutely lights out. So don't sleep on the Miami defense. And Cam Newton definitely got exposed a little bit, but I think that he'll bounce back and he'll be fine for whatever matchup they have coming up.
But Ryan Tannehill is pretty much fantasy irrelevant now with thought of his weapons, had 9.1. Lamar Jackson, 13.4 with 4 picks.
4 picks.
If you didn't have those 4 picks, he probably has like a 17, 20-point game.
Yeah.
Tom Brady this is the one fear with Tom Brady is if it's a game where the running back scored the touchdowns, he's not going to have a good day. So he only had 12.2. And then as you mentioned earlier, Jalen Hurts had 9.8. And that includes 70 rushing yards. So he really had 2.8 as a quarterback.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts is just so frustrating to watch. I thought he was going to make his fourth quarter comeback. I thought he was going to get his 20-point week like he normally does, but it just wasn't that week. The Giants just absolutely owned the Eagles. So I expect him to bounce back, though. He probably will drop 30 next week. Don't lose hope on Jalen Hurts just yet.
And then the downers for a tight end, which kind of basically reinforced the fact I'm not huge on drafting a big end tight end now. Darren Waller, 4.3, Kyle Pitts, 3.6, Mike Gesicki, 3.2, and George Kittle, 1.8. Those are 3 of the top 4 tight ends drafted in fantasy. Typically, that's not what you're looking for when you're drafting that high as a tight end.
Kyle Pitts, I think, is the biggest shock for most people, other than Darren Waller. But Kyle Pitts is supposed to be this miraculous tight end that came in, filled in Calvin Ridley, and not Calvin, filled in Julio Jones's role, was supposed to be this electric guy, and he's just absolutely disappointed teams. And I don't think it's solely his fault. I think that Matt Ryan is just terrible and should just probably retire at this point. But I think that Kyle Pitts is probably one of the biggest disappointments for the season for sure.
I think it's just it's hard to come in as a rookie tight end, even if he's basically playing wide receiver in college as tight end. It's just a more complicated position to do well in right off the bat. And you're not going to do well if basically you're the number 1 option as a rookie tight end on your team receiving wise. So I'm not surprised he's struggling.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And then getting into our flex pickups for the week at wide receiver and running back. So wide receiver, he's been your pick a few times, but mine this week is Van Jefferson versus Jacksonville, purely just off the fact that since they've lost Robert Woods, he's been seen a lot more targets in the past 3 games. He's seen 23 targets from Stafford, becoming a more focal part of this offense, gets a few more long bombs every now and then. So if you need a flex play or a wide receiver 2 play, I'd be picking up Van Jefferson.
Hey, I picked him last week and he scored an 80-yard touchdown. So if you actually listen to me, it was a really good pick for you because I think he ended with like 16 points, which is pretty good for Van Jefferson.
Right.
But my pick, I chose Russell Gage against Tampa. Tampa's secondary is just so bad. They played pretty good last game, but don't be fooled by that because their secondary is really, really bad. Russell Gage also got a touchdown last week. It seems like they're getting him more involved in the offense. The offense definitely does run through Cordell Patterson, and then Pitts gets his looks here and there. But if you need a desperation wide receiver to go in there, it should be a high-scoring game. A lot of garbage time from the Atlanta Falcons, so I would choose Russell Gage and put him in there. I bet he scores again.
And then at running back, so you actually took my actual pick I was going to talk about, but these are just 2 guys that are probably not on the waivers, but you should definitely take a look because their owners, the starter has just gone down. So if Alexander Madison or Jamal Williams are some reason sitting on waivers, they should be your first and second priority just in case they fall right to you.
Yeah, I can see Jamal Williams doing pretty well with DeAndre Swift out for a while. I don't think he's going to do what DeAndre Swift normally does, but he's definitely going to be in that RB2 conversation because the offense is probably going to run through Jamal Williams. I mean, Goff played pretty well on Thanksgiving. I'm going to give him a little bit of respect there. I think he started off the game like 10 for 10, so not hating on Goff too much, but the offense will definitely run through Jamal Williams. He will be that DeAndre Swift to the team. Same thing with Madison. Madison has proven time and time again that he's one of the best handcuffs in the league. So those two guys definitely need to be rostered after this week. And
I
then
think it's
since
just kind of funny that the Lions lost on another field goal after horrendous clock management by Dan Campbell.
they should have won that game. I was actually so mad. I chose the Lions to win that game too, and I was like, the Bears are not that good. Andy Dalton's not going to win this game. Goff's going to come in here at Thanksgiving and win it, but no, they just, the Lions are going to end up lying. Probably go 0-16. That's my guess right now.
0-16 and a 1, Brian.
I mean, that would be the
You
second
give them
time
that tie.
it would be the second time in our generation that we've seen the Lions go 0-16, which is just so bad. Clearly, they don't know how to rebuild. I feel bad for Goff because he went from a Super Bowl team to a 0-16 team, but whatever. The Lions are they're a little irrelevant at this point.
So I
But
think now Goff has gone 0-17 without Sean McVay.
I saw that stat too. Is that so? He's gone. How many weeks? He's gone 0-12 with the Lions, and then he had his Fisher days, right?
He went 0-7 with Jeff Fisher.
He went 0-7 with Jeff Fisher, and now that's so bad to see. I kind of feel bad for Goff. You got to give him a little bit of respect there. I think if he was on any other team, he would do a little bit better, but
yeah,
the Lions are just a disaster of a team. But the only pick, I mean, there's not a lot of good running backs.
There's nothing out there.
There's nothing out there. So Miles Sanders is continuing to struggle. Boston Scott is doing enough to be able to be somewhat flex worthy. But in a game where the Eagles are playing the Jets this week, I think that Boston Scott might be able to score on like a screen pass. Kenneth Gainwell, get him out of here. Jordan Howard kind of slid into that role. Jordan Howard was hurt. I'm not sure if he's going to be back for this week, but if Jordan Howard is out, I think Boston Scott's even a better flex play for this week against the Jets, where they should end up winning by, 30 points, because Zach Wilson came back last week and they looked absolutely atrocious. I don't know if they're going to go with him this week because he did get hurt. So we'll see what happens there.
And then going into our streamers for the week at quarterback, he has hurt me in the past, but I'm going back to Carson Wentz versus Houston. Houston is one of the worst teams against quarterbacks. Carson Wentz can play well enough to get you 2 to 3 touchdowns if he's needed. You just have to hope that they throw the ball to Jonathan Taylor and not just hand it off to him on the goal line every single play.
Yeah, I think that Carson will probably have a pretty good game here. It's hoping that they don't just hand the ball to Jonathan Taylor. So I was actually going to choose Carson Wentz, but you chose him first. So my pick is actually Tua against the Giants. Now, Jalen Hurts just got absolutely killed by the Giants in this game. So it's very hard to trust Tua, a guy that I hated at the beginning of the season. However, with the way that Jaylen Waddle is playing, the way that their defense is playing right now, I think that Daniel Jones and that offense is going to have a lot of turnovers and create a lot of scoring opportunities for the Miami Dolphins. And I think that Tua probably gets somewhere between 15 to 20 points. So if you need another start, I would start Tua with confidence because they are playing pretty well right now. And they might squeak into a wild card spot. You never know.
So at tight end, I picked Logan Thomas versus Las Vegas. He came back. He went 3 for 31. He did have a touchdown that was basically called back because he just dropped it in the end zone, which would have clinched the game. But with his role in the offense, he's a safety blanket for when Heineke needs someone to throw the ball to. I think with his presence back that you're going to see at least like a 6-point game from Thomas and more catches and just more looks going forward.
I'm not going to say any names, but there was a guy in one of my leagues who had Logan Thomas on his bench and he had Gerald Everett on his bench. He was deciding which one to choose. He was down 7 points. He drops Gerald Everett at 3 p.m. on Monday and he starts Logan Thomas. Logan Thomas gets 3 points. Gerald Everett gets 12 points. My pick this week is Gerald Everett versus the 49ers. I think that Russell Wilson is still nursing that hand injury. He doesn't like to throw the ball too deep. He did hit Lockett on one deep ball that was still kind of ugly because he just lobbed it up in the air. But other than that, he's been throwing really short balls, like really like over the middle, and Gerald Everett has been there for him. So he had a pretty good game this week. I expect him to probably do something against the 49ers in a game where it's going to be game scripted. They're going to have to throw the ball a lot. So don't be shocked if Gerald Everett scores another touchdown this week.
And then for defense, my pick is the Vikings versus Detroit, just going off the you've played defenses against Detroit's offense. The Vikings have not been pretty on defense this year, but I will take a bad defense versus a bad offense.
Yeah, and my pick is Baltimore against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is almost on the Detroit, Houston Jets level at this point. Big Ben is just a turnover machine. You are bound to get a fumble or an interception with Big Ben on the field. So Baltimore should have a decent game, even though their secondary is a little banged up. They haven't been playing that great on defense throughout the year. But I expect that Big Ben throws at least 2 picks, maybe a fumble in between there. They end somewhere between the 7 to 10 range.
Yeah, it's just one of the or at this point in the season where everything seems upside down. But just to kind of wrap this episode up, Ryan, we got 2 weeks left, and it's kind of do or die time for a lot of teams out there. You have to invest whatever fab you have left in the players that you believe in to really just make that final playoff push.
It's going to be interesting to come down to it. There's a lot of teams that are going to get knocked out of playoffs. If you're in playoffs right now and you lose 2 straight, there's a lot of teams that are coming in to make the playoffs. So you got to make sure you start the right guys because you could lose it just like that.
Yeah, so a lot of it is going to come down to, I think the trade deadline has passed. So it's really, you got to look at the waiver wire and just really look inside yourself to really just, there's going to be gut plays. It's going to be teams are either going to be coasting or just praying on a miracle.
I think that if you're already in the playoffs right now, you start the guys that you've always started. But if you are out of the playoffs and you need to go with your gut and start those guys that you think are going to play well versus the guys that have like tough matchups, like go with the easier matchup, go with your gut, and it's time to make playoffs. So we'll see what happens.
All right, and as always, Brian, cheers.
Cheers.